Hello and welcome to the Backlot 605 box office bonus episode where every week we decide to talk about random top 10 lists that kind of seem to kind of go with what we're talking about every week and whatnot. I'm your host, Brian Mensing, and joining me as always is my co-host, Derrick Veurink. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. You?
Good, good. It's been a fun and interesting weekend. It's been St. Patty's Day, so the area over by me is stupid busy because there's an Irish bar just on the road from me. It's been great. So, what have you decided that we are going to discuss this week?
Yeah. So, as of the night that this episode is dropping, we are just 5 days away from the Academy Awards for this year, celebrating the best in movies from the previous year.
Hmm.
And back in the day, Oscar, when a movie got nominated for an Oscar, that had a real big impact on its box office to the point where those movies would become major hits if they got nominated, even bigger hits if they won. So,
Hmm.
just for the heck of it, I thought we'd look at some of the highest grossing Best Picture Oscar winners at the box office over the years.
Cool.
So
I
obviously the criteria for this is it won its
mhm,
Oscar for Best Picture.
mhm.
And this will also count any and all re-releases that the movie had over the years to add to its box office total. So
That was actually going to be my one of my questions because I do know that just in general, some movies, whatever that get their re-releases for various different reasons, whether or not we would count those monies because I think there's something in there that would definitely change some numbers and make some upsets because of some of those re-release numbers. So
yes,
it will
absolutely.
be interesting to see how this goes. Granted, I'm pretty sure I know exactly where we're going at for number one. Um, and hey, look, I'm not shocked or surprised. Titanic comes in at number one at $659.36 million. And one of the reasons why, number one, this movie crushed it back in '97 when it first came out. Um, but I also remember that in terms of re-release, they did the 3D re-release, which
That's
brought in a
right.
lot of that 3D money
Yep.
as well. That was for its
It
20th anniversary. Was that 17 or how long ago was that?
that was the 15th anniversary in
Mm,
2012.
gotcha. Yeah. So I mean, for Titanic to come in at number one, honestly, it's a no-brainer. I figured this would be the case.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of perfect timing on its end because again, it was a movie that came out like right before Christmas, so it's coming in, right as award season is heating up. But then, of course, when people realized, oh, this movie's really, really good,
Hmm.
obviously did well from a box office perspective, but also got nominated for, oh, what was it? Was it 13 or 14 Oscars? I have to look it up, but it won 11. Yeah, nominated for 14 Oscars, won 11, including Best Picture. So, yeah, it did very well. And I think I should also note the year that Titanic won its 11 Oscars was the most viewed Oscar telecast in history. And that kind of shapes a lot of what we've been seeing in recent years, where, the Academy is trying to do things to bring more popular movies into the awards conversation.
Hmm.
Like the whole thing with, increasing the Best Picture nominees from 5 to 10 was done strictly because The Dark Knight did not get a Best Picture nomination. And they're
Right.
like, well, we would have had a lot of great ratings if the Dark Knight was part of that group. Or even this year with all the, well, Spider Man No Way Home didn't get any nominations. So let's do the most popular Oscar thing on Twitter, which is definitely going to go absolutely perfect and seamlessly. Um, but again, it all comes back to that notion of like if you have like super popular movies and if they actually end up winning, lots of awards, a lot of people will watch the Oscars for that. But
Hmm.
obviously, it really hasn't happened that much since the day of Titanic. So
Yeah, I would agree, and I applaud the Academy for trying to put some of this into the viewers' hands in terms of some of the awards that are happening, like this whole Twitter thing and whatnot. But the other part of me is like, I think that they need to try to find a better way to do it, just because you think of some of the people that would potentially vote, they don't use Twitter. they don't use the internet for social media and stuff like that. Like, I think there's room for the Academy to grow, and I do think that there's definitely things that they can do. I think to really get behind the fact that the viewers and the customers and the patrons that go see these movies, you know, at some point need to get somewhat of uh, a stake in this, if you will, to the point where that's why they would want to watch. Oh, these are the movies that I voted for. Did these movies actually get, you know, are they going to win? That sort of thing. Because after all, it's like, oh yeah, so best actor gets to be nominated by actors and gets to be voted on by actors. It's like,
Yep.
you know, at that point, give a little bit, and I think that will definitely go a long way. At least, and so like I said, at least they're trying.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, obviously, there's been a lot of growing pains. I think a lot of it will just come down to how, for example, Sunday night's Oscar telecast plays out. Because between that and the whole, we're not going to show some awards live. We'll just see what the feedback from that happens to be.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Coming in at number 2, Lord of the Rings: Return of the King, $378.25 million. Um, like, I look at this here, and I think for '03, I think this is a pretty solid number. Especially this is in the before, like, I think of like the Lord of the Rings movies. Like, what would these movies have done had they come out even just a few years later? Like, if you could literally have just shifted time to the point where if New Line and Warner Brothers would have put them out in 3D, how would these movies have done? Um, and I think that I feel that they would have looked very, very good to that point. So, I mean, the fact that these are, is there any sort of re-release or anything like that that's a part of contributing to this number?
not that I'm aware of.
Hmm.
I mean, I know there have been some re-releases. I know, like, I think it was like last year, the Cinemark XD theater showed the original trilogy for like a week, but
Hmm.
I don't think those are actually fed into these numbers that we're seeing here.
Okay,
Now, granted, we did technically get some Lord of the Rings stuff in 3D. Unfortunately, that was the Hobbit trilogy with the
that's right.
60 with the 48 frames per second look, which I think was the only way most theaters were showing those in 3D.
Hmm.
Which I ended up seeing all three of those in that format, and it's pretty jarring. Not gonna lie. So
If there's one thing I learned about 3D, which, I'm kind of okay that the 3D thing has kind of made its way to the end, to the point where we really don't see much or it even being promoted. But like, if there's one thing that I learned with 3D is there's good 3D, there's bad 3D.
yep,
There is some movies that are worth seeing in 3D and some that are definitely just used for the schlock.
yes.
So uh, I guess I don't understand, like, the 48 frames per second. Like, why would you do that? Like, I mean, I guess I think maybe just for the sake of me and how with video games and everything like that, and it's all between 30 and 60, 120. Like, 48 just seems like an oddball number. Maybe that's just because of the format.
Well, they do it because it's double the usual 24 frames.
Mm,
That makes it a little bit easier to facilitate at that point. Obviously, some projectors with their firmware updates and stuff can't handle anything more than that. It's a very complicated deal. So,
so,
but yeah, with regards to Return of the King, I'll just mention quick. This is a case where both the grosses for those Lord of the Rings movies were going up each year because, again, these came out 3 consecutive Christmases in three
hmm,
consecutive years. And then they were also winning more and more, getting more and more nominations and winning more and more Oscars each year, to the point where when Return of the King came out, there was kind of that thought of, you know, we're going to give it all the Oscars at this point because it's kind of like recognizing the entire trilogy with
right.
the honor for these movies. That's why it not only got nominated for 11 Oscars, but it won all 11 of those
Hmm.
Oscars that year. So it did very well for itself. And, it's kind of like a way to kind of celebrate, a very ambitious and very unique process for how these movies were made, because again, they were made all at once. It was a huge risk for Peter Jackson's career and for New
Hmm.
Line Cinema, where they would have been bankrupted if those movies had failed, but they didn't, and I'm glad for that.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's the kind of thing where I think that because of how much they went into these movies, not only New Line, but I mean, being that New Line was a part of Warner Brothers,
Well,
or
not
because
well.
we're not,
It
or
was
were they not at this time?
they were sort of part of that. They weren't absorbed into Warner Brothers studio
Mm,
just yet. That happened
okay.
after the Golden Compass failed.
Oh, that's right. Because the first thing I think is you're absolutely correct. Because I was just thinking, how much of a sting that, yeah, absolutely. If these would have failed, this was a huge gamble. To the point where it's like, we talk about New Line as the studio that Freddie built. This
Yep.
would have been the studio that Peter Jackson crushed if had this not worked. Which, what also I do find super fascinating is the fact that we're talking about this being released by a studio that, like I said, the house that Freddie built, the studio that is became a thing and was able to keep legs because of a horror franchise like Nightmare on Elm Street,
Hmm.
and then we're talking about how many years later that it's this epic medieval fantasy based on this old literature, to the point where it's like you realize how much that New Line had grown in just such a short amount of time.
Yep.
All right.
Absolutely.
Coming in at number 3, the Tom Hanks led Forrest Gump takes in $330.46 million. Um, this would be at this time in '94. Would this have been one of like the biggest like Tom Hanks movies? I'm trying to think what would have been
The,
bigger and
the,
better than Forrest Gump at this time.
this was definitely Tom Hanks's biggest movie up to this
Mm,
point, by far. Because like in terms of like big hits, he had like Big and A
hmm.
League of Their Own, but those are only like $100 million, maybe a little bit more than that.
Yeah.
Because this is still Toy Story had not come out yet. You know, Apollo 13 hadn't come out yet. I mean, this was really kind of the big turning point for him becoming like, between this and Philadelphia back to back, which he won back
Yeah.
to back Oscars for, this is kind of his transition into being a serious actor, for
Yeah.
lack of a better word. But also, this movie was just a flat out phenomenon. It kind of came
Hmm.
out of nowhere. It came out like around the 4th of July in the summertime, and then what was kind of a huge summer with other big movies like The Lion King and Speed and True Lies. This was the biggest movie of the summer amongst all of those, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. And, I know this movie gets egged on a lot because like people are always upset that it got a Best Picture Oscar and Pulp Fiction didn't.
Yeah.
But if you were there, you'll remember just how insane people were for this movie.
Hmm.
It's hard to
Well,
describe. It's hard to believe if you're of a certain younger age, but it happened.
oh yeah, I agree. I mean, just as you are listing stuff off, I mean, we joke around at Backlot in regards to the year of '99 and what
Yep.
'99 brought in terms of certain movies and just overall and whatnot. '94, I think, is on that same lines, if not certain times, whatever, even bigger than what '99 did for us and whatnot. Because, like you said, yeah, I mean, you just started listing off things, and the first thing I think of is like, say, even like, this '94 is also not only the emergence of some of these great, huge blockbusters, but a lot of these, like Pulp Fiction, for example, that kind of came out of nowhere from Tarantino. This is the same time when Rodriguez and Kevin Smith are coming up, so a lot of these
Yep.
like indie directors are starting to show up and whatnot. And just overall, just '94 is just crushing it. So, the fact that Forrest Gump is able to take a hold of that, plus I think the aspects of the history that Forrest Gump talks about,
Hmm.
the
Very
massive,
a very American flavored movie.
a very American flavored movie, a very amazing soundtrack to go
Yep.
with it. I know how much I talk about to the point all the time about how a soundtrack will make a movie, because then there's that emotional attachment to certain songs that hit people certain way, and just the history of the music that goes along with this movie, I think just helps people get so engrossed with this film that it doesn't surprise me that it did as well as it did in '94.
Yeah, I mean, I will freely admit, the Forrest Gump double CD soundtrack was the first CD I ever owned.
Hmm.
Um, that was a big seller, and of course, if you're looking for, you know, a very remedial encapsulation of American music from like the late '50s to the early '80s, it's in that soundtrack. And that's what was
Absolutely.
very popular.
Hmm. Oh yeah, and I in the for the sake of that double album, which I still own in that big, huge
Yep,
double
fat case.
fat case that doesn't fit on a shelf right, depending on how many CDs you have. Yes, that is still a thing. All right, coming in at number 4, Gone with the Wind at $200.88 million, December 1939. Now, I'm going to assume on multiple accounts, there's multiple re-releases that are loaded into this number. Please tell me there has to be,
Oh,
otherwise,
oh,
this
oh
is
yes.
really good. This is really good for 1939.
Oh yeah, this is a movie that they kept re-releasing like crazy over the
Hmm.
decades. I know, like in the '60s, they famously did a re-release because again, this was like a 4:3 TV shaped movie, and they decided, okay, we're going to turn this movie into a full widescreen movie, which means chopping off the top and the bottom. They actually did
Hmm.
that. Even as recently as like the late '90s, they did a full blown theatrical re-release that I know even theaters around here showed.
Yeah.
It's one of those movies, and there'll be another case that we'll talk about here later in this top 10. Where some of these movies that did win Best Pictures that are just perennial beloved classics, and anytime you do bring them out to the theater, it's kind of like an event, and people will show up for it no matter what.
Yeah.
There's always been the rumbling that at some point, like for example, the state here in town, at some point they're going to have to pull the trigger on Gone with the Wind, and when that does happen, I guarantee you the houses will be packed for that too.
Oh,
So
I would agree, and I wouldn't argue that. And this is a relatively longer movie, isn't it?
yeah, it's 4 hours.
As somebody who's never actually seen the movie, um, you know, I think that also plays into how well the movie does, because you know not many people will sit for, you said, almost 4 hours long. Is Not many people are willing to sit in a theater for that long. Um, and so I'd say that's a pretty good, amazing thing. I would be interested. I agree. I think I would almost feel that, like, if the state were to play this, that it would be something more of turning it into an event, because it
Yep,
is a movie like Gone with the Wind.
exactly.
All right, coming in at number 5, the Russell Crowe I'm an action star Gladiator comes in at $187.71 million. This is 2000. This is, I think of the turn of the century and everything like that. Like, everybody was talking about this movie. The infamous quote, "Are you not entertained?"
Yep.
I mean, this movie was everywhere when this movie came out.
Yeah, it's interesting because this was, you know, one of the things that we never really talk about much when it comes to Oscar stuff is most of the movies that win Oscars come out at like the very end of the year. But
Mhm.
Gladiator was like the very first movie of the summer of 2000, and it came out at a time where it's like Gladiator movies, had kind of like come and gone, because the
Yeah.
era of like Ben Hur and Spartacus and so forth, that's like your late '50s, early '60s, where those were the heyday. So, Ridley Scott, and this is at a point where Ridley Scott, was kind of at a lull and a low point in his career because he hadn't really had a hit since Thelma and Louise, I think, which is about like a decade before this.
Yeah.
This was a calculated risk, and again, Russell Crowe was starting to become known. He had done movies like L.A. Confidential and The Insider and Virtuosity. He was getting to become a name, but not like the huge star. And this kind of catapulted him to the top of the A list just with this movie alone, and also to an extent Joaquin Phoenix as well. So,
Oh,
um,
and the first thing I immediately thought of was A Beautiful Mind, but that was the year
yeah, that's the
afterwards.
next year. Yes.
That's the next year, because I knew that they were close by and whatnot, but for some reason I was thinking, how do we go from A Beautiful Mind to Gladiator? But it's just the opposite,
Yep.
of going from Gladiator to A Beautiful Mind, which, I mean, for early 2000 Russell Crowe, that just kind of shows you the kind of the range that he had to
Yep.
going from that to that. that almost makes me feel, as being that we've been talking about Batman as of late, is the is watching like Christian Bale go from like the machinist
Yep.
into Batman Begins, and how different they are and how different he is.
Yeah.
Uh I'm glad to see this one on the list, but at the same time too, I'm not surprised to see this one on the list because, like I said, in 2000, this was a lot of and I think that part of it, like you said, is most of the Oscar ones are late in the year type of movies that get nominated because that's what people remember.
Yep.
But I think because, like I said, that infamous line, it was such a very memorable movie, and it
Yep.
resonated to the point where like people were shit. People still quote that line years later, decades later.
Yeah. It's still memeified, that's for sure.
That is for sure. All right, coming in at number 6, the isn't this the last movie to be filmed in South Dakota? No, I'm kidding. Dances with Wolves comes in $184.21 million. Kevin Costner led the Kevin Costner that has led to have his absolute love for South Dakota. I know, like, again, am I surprised this one's not on the list? No. The way the people talk about this movie here locally, just because it was filmed in South Dakota,
Yep.
is I almost feel like 100 million of this was just from South Dakota alone. Because like in '90, this is all. Granted, I'm a kid, but like this is all adults were talking about when this movie came out, was Dances with Wolves, and then especially when it came to home video, like people were talking about this for years after this movie came out.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've talked about this before, how I done my research, and like in Sioux Falls here, Dancing with Wolves basically played in theaters here for over a year,
Mm-hmm.
because that's just how big it was. And again, you know, this is right. We kind of forget this too. Is kind of like this is at the where Kevin Costner is kind of at his stardom peak. Things have kind of been building up over the course of the '80s with stuff like The Untouchables and Field of
Mm-hmm.
Dreams and stuff like that. And admittedly, it's still kind of a big risk to have him leverage his stardom cloud, saying like, okay, I'm going to make this 3-hour Western. We're going to go film it all in South Dakota. And also, I'm going to direct it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you
I
know,
forgot he did that.
yeah, because this was the first movie he directed, if I'm not
Mm-hmm.
mistaken. Certainly not the last. Yeah, and it was a considerable risk at that time because people infamously called it Kevin's Gate, in reference to the big Western bomb from the '80s, Heaven's Gate, and thinking that
Mm-hmm.
Kevin was going to do the exact same thing here. But it paid off, and it only allowed Kevin Costner to do even more risky things, like say Waterworld and The Postman. So
Mm-hmm.
you know, you can't deny that clout that he has. I mean, we even still see it today. Like with Yellowstone being the biggest show on TV, it's because that generation that loved Kevin Costner back in the day, they'll
Mm-hmm.
be happy to watch him on TV every week if need be. So,
Yeah. Which, I mean, not to get off topic, and as somebody who's never watched Yellowstone, but just watching clips and seeing the cast that are attached to it is one of those things that's like you get a vehicle like Yellowstone, you get somebody like Costner who clearly understands the genre.
yep,
You get him as your cornerstone, and then like just again, as I've seen for different clips and whatever, the supporting cast that has come along with the ride, that is kind of crossing generations of actors and
yep,
the people that are watching it. Like, again, you're absolutely correct. Like, my mother is always about, oh, I need to watch Yellowstone, but I've got friends of mine that are 20 years younger than I am that are like, dude, you need to watch Yellowstone.
hmm,
So I think it goes to show that, yeah, at the time in 1990, Dances with Wolves, I do agree, I think was a huge risk because you know there's certain things that are being said about a western. They are very hit and miss, and you could
yep,
do them really right, you can do them really wrong, and this is one of those ones where I think it came out at the right time. It gave Kevin Costner that huge platform. People can love or hate Waterworld as much as they want to. That, like you're right, that was a very ambitious movie.
yep,
Financially, did it do well? Maybe not, but I love Waterworld just because it's so ambitious, and because you have people that are willing to take those chances on something like that.
yep.
And I'm definitely glad, and this movie has given us the Kevin Costner that we have of today, and I'm all for that.
Hmm.
I don't. He's definitely brought in a lot more money than $184 just to South Dakota alone, just because of
Yes.
his Deadwood connection.
Yep.
Coming in at number 7, Rain Man, $178.8 million, 1988. The first thing I'm going to ask, is there any re-release attached to this?
No,
I
no. This was its original run, and that's it.
because for me that is very surprising to me. I'm glad to see this one on the list just because um anybody who, they look at Tom Cruise and they immediately think, like your Mission Impossibles and action star Tom Cruise, everything like that. But
Hmm.
back in the day, there were some good, solid dramas that he's really good at. Sometimes I kind of miss that Tom Cruise. This is a
Yep.
good, solid drama. Him, Dustin Hoffman have amazing chemistry, to the point where it's like, if anybody has not seen this movie, this is one of those ones what I would highly recommend seeing this. I do think, like you mentioned in regards to like Gone with the Wind at the state and whatnot for us to do locally, this would be one I think would do pretty decent, because of who's attached
Yeah.
and the kind of movie that it is.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Like, not unlike what we just talked about with Kevin Costner. At this point, Tom Cruise is on the up and up as well. Again, this is only a couple years after Top Gun, and Rain Man actually made almost as much money as Top Gun when all is said and done. Which, if you think about that,
It's
sounds kind of
huge,
crazy. But
right?
yeah, again, this is a perfectly timed thing because this again was a Christmas release. It's able to kind of work through, because this is back in the day when the Oscars were in late March as well. So it kind of was prominent for 3 whole months. And I've brought this point up as well. Is there used to be that point in time when Tom Cruise was actually trying to be just kind of a serious actor, working with A-list directors, taking interesting material,
Hmm.
and now that he is where he is, where he's just basically like, I'm just going to do action movies and Mission Impossible stuff, and that's it.
Hmm.
I kind of miss that too. I kind of wish he would be at a point where he takes those risks, and maybe at one point, when his body starts to break down and he realizes he can't do that Mission Impossible type stuff anymore,
Yep.
maybe he'll retreat to this. At least
Yeah.
I hope so. I sort of doubt he will, but I can only hope.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I do say, the one thing I will certainly give him credit for is that, if he's ever part of, like, occasionally he will throw in, some of those like small cameo ensemble things. Like I think of when he did Rock of Ages,
yep,
or his amazing performance in Tropic Thunder.
yep,
And I think it's there. I think, but I agree with you. I think he's probably going to ride that action train for as long as he can. And you know
yep,
what? If you can, and I should rephrase, if he can and he can still pull it off, more power to him. Do it while you still can and whatnot, and then pick up those more serious runs towards the end of it when he know that he can't anymore,
yep.
because we know he's got it in him,
Hmm.
between past and present. So I am curious to see how the future holds for that. All right. Coming in at number 8, which I guess I
You just had to
voted.
wait.
I just had to wait for it. A Beautiful Mind comes in at number 8, $170.74 million. So this is what, about a year and a half after Gladiator. So,
Yep.
you know, Russell Crowe takes in a 1-2 punch for, the beginning of the 2000s. Um did he did he get an actor nomination for this movie too?
Yeah. So he won Best Actor for Gladiator.
Mhm.
He was nominated for A Beautiful Mind, but he lost to his Virtuosity co-star Denzel for Training Day.
That's right. That's right. This is the year of Training Day.
Yep.
Well, I mean, I would certainly say, for the sake of Russell Crowe, this is an amazing performance. Definitely worth the nomination and a potential win. But to lose to Denzel's Training Day, that would have been a hard one to beat. So
Yep. Yep.
I feel that's more of being in good company more than feeling like you got ripped off and didn't get the Oscar that you deserved.
Yeah.
So yeah, I I like the fact that we had this 1-2 punch from Russell Crowe in the early 2000s, just because again, yeah, we went from action, gladiator movie to
Yep.
something that is
Serious drama.
that is not that. So,
Nope.
um,
He's got range.
yeah, he definitely has range. And it I like the fact that I mean, if we look at Russell Crowe's filmography, basically since then, whatever, he's willing to do action. He's willing to have some fun with it. Because I've never actually seen it, but I've heard really good things of like The Nice Guys, where it's a little bit
Oh,
of a mix of action, a little bit of mix of comedy and whatnot, and just a feel good time.
yeah, I cannot speak highly enough of the Nice Guys. Both him and Gosling are doing incredible comic performances. It's definitely calibrated toward late Russell Crowe era
Mhm.
mode. So I highly recommend it.
Awesome. All right, we come in at number 9, Chicago, $170.69 million. This is the obviously Renee Zellweger, was it Renee Zellweger, Catherine Zeta-Jones, and
Richard Gere.
Richard Gere remake. Uh,
Well, not a remake. This was a stage musical, yes, but this is the first time, at least the first time that this had been made as a movie form. So
was it? Because I
at
was
least as
thinking, um, oh,
you're probably not thinking of something like Cabaret or something like that.
maybe
Hopefully,
maybe
so
that's what it's like. I can visually picture like Eliza Minnelli looking whatnot,
with
but yeah, maybe
that's Cabaret. That's Cabaret.
that is Cabaret. Hey, see, look at that. I like my musicals and I can't even get them correct. What the heck? Um, I like the fact that of everything we've talked about so far, you know, at least we're getting musicals in there to say, hey, you know what, that you can make a musical. I mean, even as recent as now and whatnot, and still have some success. I think it's just a matter of finding the right content and finding the right actors to put behind it, kind of thing.
Yep.
Um, I I say that and I sit there and going, I've never seen Chicago, but that was just because in terms of musicals, it was just never one that really piqued my curiosity. So, I mean, I guess it's good to see it on here, but at the same time too, I'm like, this I think maybe it's just for 2002, this wasn't meant for my audience.
Yeah, and I'll admit when I first saw Chicago back in '03, I wasn't that fond of it as well.
Hmm.
That said, when it did come to the state back in this past November, I rewatched it again, and I was a lot more positive on it as before because I was a little bit more appreciative of the narrative structure of the movie, where it kind of combines like this, true crime-ish story with these more extravagantly produced musical numbers. It works very well. It's also got other great supporting performers: Queen Latifah, John C. Riley. It's a pretty solid. It's a very solid movie. I can definitely understand why it had the momentum that it did at that
Hmm.
point. And of course, again, this is a Miramax movie, so Harvey Weinstein, of course, doing everything he can, to make it a big awards player, which then translates into a big box office player, at least
Hmm.
at this point. Because again, you're seeing this cluster of like Titanic, Gladiator, Chicago, Beautiful Mind, all these movies from like the late '90s, early 2000s, where you still had that, and even Return of the King, where that prominence of box office hits were still able to be made out of Best Picture material, and so and
Yeah.
vice versa. So
Yeah, and I mean, and clearly is what we've been able to see though too, especially in terms of winners and whatnot, is like I mean, even just 6 through 10 here, we're seeing November, December. That clearly it's like, these studios, they're like, well, we need to put them into the point where people are going to remember them in a month when they start putting in their votes and whatnot. So
yep,
I at least appreciate, yeah, again, like once with the Gladiator, where it's like, you know, that's a movie where it's for me feels like it's a justified win because we're talking about it for months, not just that's the movie that I remember from a month ago, kind of thing. So, coming in at number 10, when movies were a whole lot different, like with Gone with the Wind. The Sound of Music comes in $159.29 million when a movie in March, basically after the awards ceremonies get done, has enough legs to make it all the way through to the next award season to win.
yep.
Um, but I think one thing that attributes to that, and I guess, I mean, obviously I can't say for the sake of 1965 through probably what, 67, 68, because movies like this would run for years.
Hmm.
That it's a matter of, this is one of those movies when people talk about, oh, what musicals do you even know?
Yep.
Like,
This is the
people like,
first one.
yeah, The Sound of Music is usually Sound of Music, and I think West Side Story are like the two like biggest ones. Like if anybody knows, like if you'd be like, name one musical off the top of your head, this is the one that comes up, and just goes to show how many years later, 50, shoot, 70 years later, I can't even do my own math right. That it still holds that much resonance across so many generations. I mean, even me, I'm clearly not even born when this movie comes out and whatnot. And this is one of my favorite musicals, period, let alone from when I was a kid kind of thing.
Hmm.
That it's just one of those ones where it hits so well and it just holds up so much over the years.
Yeah, I mean, this is a movie that over the course of its 55 plus years, it's managed to stay in that public consciousness. A big part of that, it did have a bunch of theatrical re-releases, but
Hmm.
also, obviously, it had its annual airing on TV, which still happens to this day.
Hmm.
Every year, like a week before Christmas, ABC will air Sound of Music in its entirety on like a Sunday night before Christmas. And again, this did play forever. Prior to Dancing with Wolves, The Sound of Music was the record holder for the longest playing movie in Sioux Falls, which is like 10 and a half months. Back in the day when there were only like 3 or 4 theater screens, period.
Right.
So that is massive. You know, and even like you might recall, like when we had our review of 2021 episode and we looked at the state figures and we saw how The Sound of Music was one of the very top movies to sell tickets at the state because every showing they did, they packed it in and they had to end up adding more showings in
Hmm.
January to accommodate the demand because, it's a classic and people love that movie and they will come out in droves to see it no matter what. So,
Yeah, and it's kind of those things that I think for the sake of our local viewers and whatnot is I feel like it's one of those kind of movies where I feel like the state would be able to do it at least on an annual or maybe even like a semi-annual or like every 2 years or something like that,
mhm.
and would still fill the theater, multiple screenings and whatnot, just because it is that movie that people are willing to go back to over and over again, even though they know that they've been able to watch it at home for decades and whatnot, just because it's just that grand film that you just need to see on a big screen.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, that has been our top 10 Best Picture Oscar winners at the box office. Call me not surprised that pretty much everything on here I think is very just wise in terms of the movies that did win.
Hmm.
That there isn't, I mean, even if I've never seen Chicago, I understand the everything behind it and why it was easily and deserving of its win. Um, so yeah, did you find any in your research and whatnot, like anything that you think that would have like either because like we had a good movie like you mentioned of like Pulp Fiction losing to like uh
Forrest Gump.
Forrest Gump, anything in there that you're like, oh well, surprised this one just fell short, or you know any, was there any upsets as you were looking through this?
I mean, there were some close ones. I'll go quickly through some of the ones that just fell outside of the top 10.
Hmm.
11 was The Sting. Number 12 was Slumdog Millionaire. Number 13 was The King's Speech. Number 14 was Platoon. Number 15 was Argo. 16 was The Godfather, which may crawl up a little bit in years because again, it still gets theatrical releases
Hmm.
even this year, as we talked about on a previous episode. Other ones to finish out the top 20 were The Departed, The Silence of the Lambs, American Beauty, and the original Rocky. So,
Wow. And one thing I do find fascinating about those is that it's a very diverse cross decade. You know,
yep.
Rocky in the 80s, you got Godfather in the 70s, but then you're getting stuff, that is much newer kind of thing. So, very fascinating. So, awesome. So, that being our top 10 Best Picture Oscar winners. Excuse me. Be sure to follow us on social media and subscribe to the podcast and support us over it at patreon.com. What are we looking forward to for next week, or are you keeping us all in suspense?
I have it figured out. So next, as we talked about on last night's show, The Lost City is coming out this weekend. We already did a Channing Tatum episode, so why not talk about Sandra Bullock and look at what she's done over the course of her nearly 30-year big screen career? So
Yes. Here's to Demolition Man. No, yeah, I'm pretty sure that will not show up on a top 10 list anytime soon. All right. Well, that has been our box office bonus episode. Be sure to check us out every Tuesday as we talk about any random top 10 list that comes out of Derrick's brain that usually has something to do with what's going on in the movies and or the podcast. Be sure to check us out every Monday as well as we talk about the top 10 or the top 10. Wow. The box office for that week. And we will check you out here next week.
see you then.